My name is Ville Parkkinen. I'm a director of product marketing at OpenText, so an information management company. I have a booth over there if you want to have a chat with us later on. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about digital product passports, and I'm joined by my colleague Steve Dale here. So he's going to be joining me on the stage towards the end of the presentation. How many of you actually know about digital passports already? So have heard about the term, know. Yeah, I was assuming that it's not quite that popular. So great, I'm able to add more value here. So just educating on like basic things. It is driven. The concept is driven by sustainability. So that's a key element, obviously, of the track that we're talking about here. But there are some additional elements that we wanted to explore as well towards the end. So it's going to talk about the broader opportunity around digital product passports. So just some background with this, and let's see if my clicker starts working. It does. So this has been over let's say a past year and a half. It's been kind of on and off in the news. There are some items that you see globally, actually. It's not just in the EU, even though I will be mentioning the EU a lot because they are kind of at the forefront in driving a lot of these developments. But there are all of these, let's say, FOMO articles like, hey, are we ready? Because no one quite knows what they are. So they're like, okay, is it going to apply to us? Is it not going to apply to us? What should we do? So I'm, equating this to kind of the GDPR discussion before anyone knew what GDPR was actually going to do. So we're kind of at that point, and I'll address the maturity a bit later on. But just to know that there is this kind of ramping on conversation, and there are, again, discussions. Again, EU going to be talking about that a lot. In the UK, the government they provided some commentary in connection with a product safety review back in November around how the UK is going to be looking at the EU initiatives around digital product passports, whether or not they're going to be aligning with that. So a lot of things still open. But in this presentation, as I said, I want to go through a couple of basic things. So it's, again, the 5 things that I want to share today. What are they? What are digital product passports? So let's get that straight. Let's talk about what's the maturity. So what do we know at this point, and what do we not know yet? Legislation, will there be some? Spoiler, yes, there will be. I'll talk about that. And then I also want to focus on the benefits, and I think this is something that is maybe of a less, has had less focus lately, but we have some history there, and Steve will be sharing some of our experiences on the related solutions. So there are plenty of benefits, and we'll go over those. And then finally, I want to share some ideas around what can you do now, what can you kind of, how should you think about them now, and what are some of the ideas there. So if that sounds fair, I think we can go over and talk about these things in more detail. So first of all, what is a digital product passport? There are differing definitions. EU likes to add some additional ambitions into the definitions, but basically what it is, it's a digital record linked to a physical product. That's kind of this in a simple way. And to kind of illustrate that, the most typical way how you would find this on a product would be something like a serialized QR code, and we're going to go into this a bit more detail later on. But basically, you have a URL attached to the product. Again, QR codes are easy to read with your mobile, so that's the most convenient way, I would argue, to deliver that. And then it will lead you to a digital record, could be a web page that provides you a set of information. Now, this information can be pretty much anything, and this is part of the opportunity. If you have a web page, you can build all kinds of experiences around that. Where the legislation and the regulations come in is they will dictate some mandatory data elements that you will need to share to the consumer. So this is kind of where the regulation comes in, but it doesn't stop there. And I have some ideas later on, let's say, like how to conceptually think about this in terms of like what would be the solutions that you need. So I'll go through some of the examples later on. But again, the data elements that you share in a digital product passport could be around the unique identifier, the GTIN. It could be the tariff codes for the product. It could be compliance documentation. We were just discussing with one client around the EU deforestation regulation, so information that you have to have on certain products. So depending on the product type and category, there might be material data safety sheets, all kinds of information that might be mandatory to process. So it depends on the product category. And it also could be something that is more geared towards the value for the user. So is it a user manual, maybe instruction videos even that you want to share? But at the core, the digital product passport is really about digitally delivering that information about the specific product and making it easily accessible. I'll talk about the maturity and the developments in a moment, but I wanted to share one example of, and this is, to my knowledge, the first standard that has actually been published around digital product passports. So the Battery Consortium has published a standard for the data attributes that they are basically saying that are going to be needed in battery passports. So the EU has a regulation around batteries, industrial batteries. This is one of the categories that have been prioritized for their sustainability impact. So that's basically why they've been prioritized. And I'll go through some of the other categories as well. But in the battery pass, they are basically saying that you have these 90 data attributes that you have to share within that battery passport across the 7 categories there are. So this is a great document to read. It kind of opens up the process around standardization and thinking about, so it's a very long document. I've linked it on the slide there. And on their website, you can find more materials. There's the actual standard, and then there's some background information around the industry benefits. And the way this is working, and I'll address it in the legislation, but these are going product category by product category. So there's general legislation on the EU level that is being planned or actually is already in force, but then the specific details will come from these product-specific or product category-specific regulations, such as the EU battery regulation. But again, this was published last month. I think it was 16th of January when they came out and published the data attribute standard. So there's a lot of stuff happening in this space, and the other product categories are advancing. But one specific example. So the maturity, as I've been talking, it is very low. We're still kind of in that phase of things taking shape. So there's a lot of projects going on, pilots, standardization in standardization projects, and the battery pass was one of the first ones to get completed. Some of the other things that are going on, they're being worked on in this project called Surpass 2, which is a follow-up project from the initial Surpass project. Again, you see kind of some of the prioritized product categories. Again, EU is looking at this very heavily from the sustainability angle, from circular economy. How do we get more life out of the products? How do we recycle them more efficiently? So that's a very strong influence behind the legislation. We'll go through some of the other benefits as well, but it's a very strong motivator. And as you can see, the prioritized categories tend to have a big impact on the climate, and that's why they are at the top of the list. But overall, there are around 30 product categories that are expected to be covered by the EU regulations. And there are discussions, particularly around batteries. There's been discussions in Canada. Canadian government has been talking about that. The US automotive industry has had conversations around that. So it's very likely that it's not just the EU where these get deployed, but it's going to expand over the world. China is working on their own digital product passport. I think India is working on, most from the software point of view, that they see this as a big opportunity for their software industry. So there's global developments going on. But in terms of the legislation, the main thing that you want to know is that in the EU, the expected adoption is between 26 and 2030, depending on the product category. And how this works is that there's this one all-encompassing legislation called ESPR, so not GDPR, but ESPR, Eco-Design for Sustainable Products. And you can kind of see, the motivation behind the regulation. So that was passed last year in July. It took force. And what this regulation says that there's definitely going to be digital product passports in Europe. Doesn't really say much more than that. It's basically living up to the more specific regulations per product category than to define what is actually expected from the companies, what the data attributes are. So all of this work is still to come, and it will be published and before, obviously, the adoption is expected from businesses. But this is where we are. So there is already a law or regulation in force that will mandate the adoption of DPPs in Europe, and very likely, again, to span much broader than that. Then going into the benefits. So I think this is now we're getting into the more interesting area, at least from my opinion. So I think the whole concept around taking physical object and adding value to it through a digital experience, essentially. It's not just the record, but it's the whole experience of how you can actually drive more value out of the product. Well, it has benefits for the consumer, but it also has benefits for other parties. So if we look at the consumer side, obviously it makes products easier to use, so you get more information. We're going to talk about authentication, so just having the ability to trust that the product that you purchased is an authentic one. That's a value for the consumer. And then also the product safety and sustainability. So even when you're making a purchase decision, if there's a QR code on the product before you're buying it, you want to know what's actually gone into this, where was it made, that information that will be mandated and to be made available for consumers. You can actually use it in making a purchasing decision. So it is something that is clearly designed to benefit the consumers and make them more aware of the product and better more adept at using the products. For the manufacturers, obviously you get more visibility. So as you track more data about your products throughout the supply chain, you can drive down emissions. You can improve, recycling, circulation of products, recycling. And then also what Steve is going to be talking about, which is kind of where our kind of heritage in this area comes from, is in this brand protection. So, I'll let Steve go through those use cases. So I'm not going to steal his thunder, but this is one big benefit for organizations. So protecting against counterfeiting, but then also supply chain traceability and also recall management. So when you have a digital, specifically on a unique level the products, you obviously can reduce the recall scope. So not recall all the products, but just the ones that, even individual products that that might have a problem. So again, we'll get to those. The other benefits, I'm kind of calling them broadly third parties here. It would include governments. I mean, again, the EU is driving this for a reason, but also service companies. So you can actually create new business models around repairing products and enable the repair and maintenance service companies, depending on the product, obviously. But this is also in the EU is encouraging this more like ecosystem thinking around extending product life cycles, and the third party benefiting is one of the key elements there. So then going into what can we do now? So I wanted to present this model around like what are the technical capabilities, but what I really want to highlight is the thinking beyond just the compliance, because in a lot of cases when there's regulation, there's another compliance regulation that we have to meet. But then how do we see this as an opportunity, and are there business cases already, even though we don't know what's going to be expected, but can you actually get on that journey and start thinking about it more broadly? And again, like Steve was going to be talking about some of the benefits that we've seen with our clients in a related area. So I'll go over some of the key elements that you're going to need. So again, if you think about the digital product passport, what it is, it's basically a web page or a digital record. So that's kind of what the passport itself is. It's a way to view information about a product in a digital format. But that in and of itself is not really enough. So you need to, first of all, link that with the product. So how do you actually get the consumer to see, or whoever's viewing the passport, how do you get them to see that? So you need something like the QR code. Again, we don't know the specs on all of the product categories, but it might be, for example, in the battery passport, they do dictate that it is, or mandate that it is a serialized QR code. So each battery is individually identified. So it's an individualized QR code that has to be used to get the link. So you have to have a solution that is able to produce those. And then there's obviously on the usage of those QR codes, there are all kinds of analytics, and I'm going to discuss some of those use cases there. So what can you do on that interface? But again, that's only going to lead you to the passport. I would argue that the biggest challenge for most organizations is not going to be in either of these. Basically, you have a solution for supply chain traceability based on the QR codes. It's not new technology, exists, is being deployed successfully. You're going to need a web page. Well, there's a lot of web pages out there, and you have web publishing platforms that you can use. But where the biggest challenges are going to come from is how do you manage the information? So capture all the necessary information needed. So something like a product information management system. And then perhaps more importantly, how do you get that information there in the first place? So how do you capture it from, using GS1 codes, the GTINs, you get them from GS1. You may be collecting some data from your suppliers. You're collecting data from all kinds of places. And you might also, depending on the regulation, you might actually have to share that into common data pools. So the backend integrations are going to be probably the most painful in this, and the overall data strategy around how do you manage the data. And then depending on where you want to take this, because there's sort of this baseline, okay, we have, let's say the battery passport, you have 90 data attributes that you have to share. So, okay, let's just get a web page that only shows those. And that can be, okay, you meet the compliance. But if you start thinking about it, and kind of what we discussed yesterday, for those of you who were at the gala dinner, is customer comes first. So I would highly recommend looking at this. What's the right kind of experience for the consumer or the customer? It might not be just the consumer, to access the information, and what more can you deliver for them when they get the mandated data attributes, but what more can you share with them? So in this case, it might be things like, okay, user guidelines. You might need a separate document management solution for that. It might be the certifications or other kinds of digital documents, or it could be videos or images. So you might need digital asset management, so instruction videos, these kinds of things that you can link there. So it can be broader than just simply the data strings or the attributes themselves. And then the final piece is that you can also, within the bounds of privacy legislation, of course, and the usual, well, the GDPR, you can also look at the overall, like, how do you manage the experience? Do you want to do proactive notifications for the customers about the products that they have? Do you want to link it with some other kinds of marketing programs or other customer engagement loyalty programs? And for that, you might need other, customer experience management or other kinds of marketing automation solutions that are linked as part of the overarching solution. So again, a lot of the darker blue, they are optional, but something that when you're thinking about the strategy, I would encourage to think through, because it can be a differentiating feature. And customer engagement is one of the main use cases, even without the whole digital product passport legislation that we're seeing to drive a lot of value. And this is actually what we want to focus on today. So there's a lot of stuff in there. We actually do operate in practically all of these boxes, but we want to focus on this first part, because we believe that even before you know the specific data that you have to collect, the data attributes that you have to serve to the consumer, and any other kind of regulations, there is value in and of itself in already like taking a physical product and creating a digital record for that, or digital experience around that product. And this is what Steve will now be kind of covering in more detail. So I'll invite Steve over to the stage.
There's only 2 slides. So there's a couple of points I want to get across, and a lot of it is reiterating what Ville's told us. The first thing really is that the compliance aspect here, the sustainability thing, is kind of the least exciting part of the digital product passport story. And I'm talking to customers all the time and taking them on this journey, and this is the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle. There's a lot of other conversations that have additional value, which is what Ville spoke about. The other key point that I want to get across here is this: a lot of this sounds like an emerging technology play. It sounds like something new. It sounds like innovation. It's completely not. The concept of a digital product passport and the technology behind it has existed for a very long time. It's tried, it's tested, it's proven. The return on investments are very clear to see. So it's not experimental. It's just the terminology digital product passport is something very new and everybody's interested in it. But like I say, it's the least interesting element of it. So I want to give you a little bit of a story and take you back to how OpenText started working with what is now known as a digital product passport. So you go back to about 2009, it was initially Hewlett-Packard that had a problem with grey market diversion and counterfeit of their ink on a massive scale. Back then, HP was top 25 in terms of global supply chain size. And they looked out in the market and there was nothing out there that could meet their needs. So they built the solution. Basically, they invented the algorithm for the unique serialization that is guaranteed to be unique up to infinity. And they built the platform around it for tracing that through the QR code. Now, they did it as a brand protection solution. They were losing a lot of money from low-cost product intended for one region being moved and sold into another region, and there was a huge counterfeit issue. As soon as they started putting the unique QR codes, they closed down counterfeit operations by tracing copied QR codes back to the original scan and go and see where the counterfeit operations came from. And they brought hundreds of legal cases against rogue distributors that were breaking the rules of their contract and moving product into different areas. So that was their reason for building it, and they got that return on investment really quickly. But what happened was the supply chain guys suddenly started to see all this additional data at a very granular level, and they started to see that blind spots were being filled. You know, we didn't know how our product was moving all the way around in the supply chain. So they were getting additional value from that, and they started to apply that to recall management, as Ville said, down to the individual products that they could take off the shelf rather than a whole batch. So there was gains for supply chain, and they benefited on the back of the investment for brand protection. This is your sort of, you know, your IP guys, your legal guys, not necessarily working with supply chain, but now they're, as a double act, there's additional value across those two lines of business. However, the conversation right now that's really driving the uptake of Digital Product Passport is the consumer engagement angle. So where brands lost that one-to-one communication with their customers because the retailer was perhaps owning that communication, who's buying what where, this gave the brand an opportunity to speak directly to the customer. And that capability was there, but it kind of sat dormant until COVID. Post-COVID, we all learnt to scan QR codes. Certain age groups are more likely to scan QR codes, the younger generation. Certain regions globally are obsessed and will always scan a QR code. So it's opened up this new channel of communication, but also expectation from the consumer as well. I want a video, I want to know what's in the product, but I want a video on how to use it, or I want to win something or learn something. So linking that experience with brand loyalty programs, or taking the consumer from an authentication digital product platform that we host over into their own marketing and customer experience, is really valuable. That's driving the investment in digital product passports. It's driving the innovation in digital product passports. Companies are using it for sample management tracking. They leave samples around different places, and they've got data coming straight back into Salesforce, so the sales guys knows which regions are using the samples and things like that. Really valuable information. So that's the cool, interesting bit. They've got loads of budget as well, by the way, and they are investing heavily in this. So you can backfill from a consumer engagement point of view, supply chain can benefit, and the brand protection team can benefit as well. Going forward, the conversation's moving towards sustainability because it's being driven by compliance. But the reason I say it's kind of the least sexy bit is because it's a tick box exercise, you know? And I speak to a lot of customers, they're going, we're waiting to see what the rules are, and then we'll get or build a solution that meets those rules. No one ever oversolves for compliance, right? They do enough, they tick in the box, somebody needs to know something, great, it sits in a compliance department. But the solution to the digital product passport compliance has already been oversolved and is being used by these other business units who are getting a return on their investment. So it's taking that thinking away from that insurance, it's a have to have, to hang on a minute, this is a multiple line of business value concept. And again, I bring your attention back to the consumer engagement bit, thinking about the talk last night. How can we grow our businesses? How can we serve the rest of the organization? Start by thinking about the customer and the customer's experience. That drives the investment, the engagement, the growth into new markets, competing against other companies that are delivering a better customer experience, and you will solve digital product passport compliance at the same time. Most of this is out of the box solution. unique serialization, unique printing is easily feasible. And we've been hosting a platform since 2009 that manages all the analytics, the intelligence. You can set flags about certain activity and scans when they happen in different regions and things like that. So the solution's already there, is what I'm trying to say. A use case, Yeti. Does everybody know the brand Yeti? They're quite expensive, aren't they? Stanley's their competitor. So Yeti are a customer. Stanley are just signed with us. So we're going to get both of the players in that market. By the way, if we follow up, if anybody's interested, we've got some, we didn't bring them, but we've got some Yeti cups to give away. Don't want to go away empty-handed. So if you have a conversation with us afterwards, you'll get one of these nice Yeti mugs. So they've got a QR code on the bottom of each one. They deployed the solution within a matter of weeks because they physically stick a sticker on the bottom in the factory in China. It's great. It goes through the dishwasher hundreds of times. It's really good. But they had a counterfeit problem, and they found out because they were getting product returns of not their product, right? And they didn't know the extent of it. They didn't know where it came from. So they quickly deployed this solution and suddenly started to learn about who was copying their product, who was copying the QR code. Most of it got traced back to Mexico. And they were happy to learn about the extent and movement of the products throughout their supply chain. But then one occurrence happened. They had a whole container load stolen. It didn't arrive at its destination, so they didn't know where it had gone. So they switched on in our platform the tags to say if any of those individual QR codes are scanned, raise a flag. And they managed to recover the entire container, about several $1 million worth of products. Had been somebody had kept it quiet for a couple of weeks and then started selling them at a gym down in Texas in the USA. And people are going, I've got a bargain, I'm going to scan the code to check, is it authentic? They can't help themselves. And those guys became the inspectors. They're the field inspectors that alerted the brand to go and recover those goods. What Yeti are doing now, again, they started with a brand protection use case, but what they're doing now is saying to customers, scan this, we'll take you over to our customer experience journey, we'll send you out some free stickers, and they're using it as a way to engage, to upsell, and to build that relationship with the customer. So it's paying for itself basically in several different areas. So that's my message, is to think outside of compliance and regulation. And the way we work with customers is to try and bring those different lines of business to the table into a workshop to say, what can you get out of it? Some people tell me that's a bit mad because then everyone says, well, who's paying? If all the departments are in the room, they're all looking at each other going, who's going to fund it? Well, it's probably going to be the consumer engagement, customer experience guys, because they've got the budget for growth. Everyone else benefits. You look like a hero because you've delivered this value across your business. So that's my takeaway. That's my sort of input. Think more than the sustainability aspect. I think you're going to summarize kind of what we've been through there.
Yeah, you can stay here. I think there's just one slide that we wanted to summarize, and thank you for the overview. Again, what we've discussed here, it's just that front end. We haven't touched upon the digital product passport yet, but this is the access point to the digital product passport. What you serve on that location where they end up from the QR code, you can do whatever you want, but it's a web page as we've discussed. But this is kind of one part of the solution that is standing on its own legs already, even before you know what are the specific data attributes that you need to bring to the experience that you're guiding them to. So we're calling it. And also what I love about this, it actually was acquired by OpenText as a solution a couple of years ago. And when I learned about it, I love the simplicity of it, because we're calling it sort of the low-tech IoT, because it's sort of, it's a sticker, it's a QR code on a product, but it can do all of these. So I just find that amazing. So a couple of key takeaways from here. If you're selling goods to the European Union and you're within that quite broad range of 30 plus product categories, it's happening. Law is already there. So the regulation, the ESPR, it's already in force as of July last year. So it's happening. We don't know what that means yet necessarily for all of the product areas, but it's happening. the second point is that you should be, as we've discussed, thinking bigger. So compliance can be boring, but there's so much opportunity here that at least go through that exercise of thinking like, what is the experience that we want to provide for our consumers? It's going to be different for different brands. You're going to be talking to the consumers in different ways, and probably the marketing department that's going to have a lot of say, like what is our brand, like how should we communicate to our customers via our brand, and it's a differentiator. So thinking about that carefully is definitely worth it. And then the third area is really the timing. So usually what happens with compliance is that people sit on it, like they wait until they know the specific details. And then once they do, they realize that, oh, we have 3 months to time. So we need to get something together. And we see this particularly in areas like electronic invoicing is a great example. It's another area that we work with. But it tends to happen that we don't quite know what the regulation is going to be in Poland for the invoicing, so let's just wait for that. And then when it's published, like, oh, you have 6 months to, we need a solution quick, so let's buy whatever. Like we don't have time to run the RFP process. We need to buy something. And then it happens over and over again. And you, after 15 countries, you have 15 different solutions that are completely fragmented. So just the point there, thinking about it already, like what's your strategy for meeting the requirements? What are the components? Which one can you activate now? Which ones need to follow later? Can you deploy something now that is building the readiness to comply? Again, ultimately, it's going to be, the biggest problem is going to be how do you capture the data? So the integrations and processes, and then how do you manage the data? Those are going to be the biggest problems. But the systems, you likely already have some of these systems that can do the technical piece. It's more around the strategy, around how you do governance. So that's everything that we had. I think we're quite well ahead of time, so we have time for questions now. As Steve said, anyone who's interested in a Yeti mug, we can capture the details and send those over to you. But yeah, interested to see if there's any questions in the room, anything that we've discussed today, and yeah. That was
fantastic presentation, and I think fantastic presentation. I think what I particularly see this one as something like a next step of barcode, RFID, and then digital product passport. But just a question in terms of tampering and counterfeit you mentioned about, like what if somebody tries to copy the QR code, which is one of the information collector in this particular digital product passport. How do you mitigate those kind of issues? Because it could be like a counterfeit product, but with a original QR code, and you would lose lots of revenue in that particular aspect.
Yeah, it is a numbers game, and I think I'll take the first pass, and you can then supplement, because I think you are having more of these conversations than I am. But basically, because it is a numbers game, so all of the QR codes that are generated are unique. So you can individually track the code. And what happens in the backend is that you track the analytics across the codes. So typical behavior, most codes probably don't get scanned at all. But then if you have a very enthusiastic consumer, they might scan it a couple of times, 5 times, 10 times even. But then if you start seeing that, hey, I have 50 scans for the same code coming from all of these different locations, either we have a very enthusiastic consumer who's really excited about QR codes and likes to travel a lot, or that code has been copied, in which case we're going to flag it. And the next time someone scans the code, because what they're doing is they're trying to, like, as a consumer, you're trying to authenticate. So is this thing real? So you get a message, and if everything's fine, you get a message, congratulations, you have an authentic product, would you like to subscribe, or whatever you've experienced from there. If the code has been disabled or kind of flagged, the message will show that unfortunately we cannot authenticate your product. Could you be in touch with us? So we'll get the details, and that's the way you engage, because that's you get a connection to a consumer who has potentially bought a counterfeit product, and then you can do the investigation. Okay, we're so sorry that this happened for you. We're happy to ship you, get you 50% off or 80% off, or give you a free free product to replace the one that you unfortunately bought that was counterfeit. Where did you buy that? So we would really like to do investigation. That's how you can work with law enforcement. But it's a numbers game. So and it's again very low tech, but it's the unique code. And I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
Well, or you trace it back to that first scan. The counterfeiter got it, and the counterfeiters are good, they're smart, and they want to replicate the exact experience. So they're going to scan it and go, I need to copy what this is. you almost want them to copy the QR code because, as Ville said, you get multiple scans and you now know that there's a counterfeit in the market. The approach to anti-counterfeit, there's no silver bullet, one fix-all solution. There's the whole brand protection strategy. But we've got a lot of customers that will double up on this and they'll use holograms, other technologies. But one of the mistakes people make is if they say, right, we're going to use some sort of fancy technology so you can never copy a QR code, and there's a lot of that out there, it usually requires an app. So you scan it and you've got to log into this app because of the label type security. Consumer behavior says no one downloads an app, especially there's a certain generation of age that has got a concentration span of about 6 seconds. They'll scan it to go, do I win something, learn something, or is my life any easier now? And if it says download an app, I'm done. I can't be bothered, I've got enough apps. So those that hide a non-copyable QR code behind an app are not getting any scans. So when they look at their dashboards, there's no dots on the map because nobody completed the experience. You want to encourage people to scan as much as possible. And the consumer becomes your field agent. So you build up the picture.
Yeah, and then just a connected question to that one is like, we have this serialized QR code. For like GS1, RFID is like a global standard setting agency. So is there any like a global setting standards coming up within the digital product passport? Are you guys thinking about it in that direction? Thank you.
Just GS1 standards are driving it, and the GTINs and the usual mandatory requirements are built into our unique serialization. So
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and just to add maybe on that, because again, like obviously there are different kinds of situations. So again, what Steve said about the uncopyable code that requires the app, I mean, it can work if you control who's scanning that. So maybe that's probably not a consumer, but if you want this authentication, let's say more in an industrial setting, for example, then it might have a case where you can actually mandate that the person So again, there are differences there depending on the use cases, but that's mostly for the consumer side. It's make it easy, make it so easy to use that they, and again, like attached to a win something so that you actually encourage usage. Yeah, we had another question. Yeah, I think we'll go. Yeah, continue next.
Hi, we are Lactalis and we shipped yogurt or chilled dairy to supermarkets, so the packaging is relatively small to add this kind of information, which is brilliant. But at the moment, everything relies on the barcode. Do you see that coexisting with the barcode or replacing the barcodes, or how quickly, and do you have any insight from the industry of these two digital information would work?
Yeah, GS1 are taking it in that direction. I think there's a certain number of customers that have signed up to start moving in that direction. I don't know what the market says in terms of how long that's going to take, but you're going to see the barcode with the QR code next to it. The QR code experience will eventually take over, but there's a whole lot of EPOS equipment and everything else that needs to be replaced before you can completely get rid of the barcode. So that transition is going to take a lot of time, but all the energy is being put into the capability behind the QR code because it's an unlimited amount of attributes that you can put behind the QR code. So it will go in that direction. We are key users of our platform are in the infant formula business globally. They had some compelling events as to why they wanted consumer authentication around their product. So we've got a deep experience in that space. They're doing some really cool things in that market globally. So that's where we see it heading.
Thank you.
Yeah. And next question.
It might be a bit of a...
Hi.
It might be a bit of a basic question, but obviously I can see it absolutely working with Yeti, no problem, because it's large individualized items, but you started off by mentioning sort of batteries in a serialized setting. Now, obviously, if you go to buy an 8-pack of Energizer, are each of the barcodes individually on separate batteries, or are they on the packing unit and the sellable unit? So how does the scanning actually work, especially if you've got a serialized product, but things are done maybe in batches, like you can't individually recognize each battery going into an 8-pack, for example, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think I have an industry answer for that because battery passport. I'm using that as an example because it's one of the first ones to come out with the standard. It depends on. I haven't read through the regulation. Is quite a long piece of document, so they might actually have a detailed answer for this. But it's really down to, again, like the QR codes are. I mean, they are cheap to produce and they can be easily attached as a sticker to a product. Depends on the manufacturing process, like how you want to do that. But I don't know the specific regulations there for the batteries as an example. But yeah, usually you would track a product unit, and a battery separately. But then of course there might be, because that regulation doesn't actually apply to like small batteries. It applies to electric vehicles, light motor transportation and industrial that are like above 2 kilowatts. That's the scope of that regulation. So I don't know if there's actually like another piece of legislation that's, for the consumer batteries, for example. So we go into the specifics of each of the product categories and industries there. From a technology point of view, again, it's a URL essentially that's generated. It's a unique identifier. You can attach that unique identifier and deliver it as a QR code, as a sticker, like is common because it's the most cheapest way to do it. But then you could also embed it into an RFID chip. You could do it as a Bluetooth, and we've actually, when you do the supply chain tracking use case, you usually want to and we're talking about the consumer goods. This is where we have the most experience in. But you want to do the individual product level tracking on QR codes and stickers because they are easy to read on a mobile phone for the consumer. But then as goods are moving through the supply chain and you want to do the tracking, you may want to do the case level code as an RFID so that you can scan it with a receiver rather than actually a physical scan. And you can also take that to the pallet level. So there are like different ways in which you can kind of manage the relationships between an individual product and then the shipment or the kind of packaging stuff. Yeah,
I think it's a great question. I don't know the rules on small batteries. It's an interesting one. I mean, they've got a wrap around them. Effectively, they've got a label, so you could potentially get one on there. But it's very similar to the problems faced in pharma because of the way they repackage individual blister packs of products that come out of a box, and they give you two. So they're having the same problem. So that hasn't been addressed yet, but it's a very interesting question.
So essentially, it's easier to start with the biggest stuff, and then over time work your way down to fast-moving goods.
Or start at package level.
Yeah.
I mean, the lower the value of the goods, you might start by individually serializing at the sort of case level. But the higher the value of the product, the more you can go individual. We're laser etching on the bottom of infant formula tins. Some people are putting 3 QR codes, one on the bottom, one on the top foil, and then one underneath the foil now as well. So it's like triple authentication, and you only win a prize when you've bought it, paid for it and opened it. So you scan that third code. So it's ever changing where people are finding places to put QR codes. But great question. Yeah, thanks. All good questions.
How would this play with PIM? So I work in a consumer goods company, so we have health products, hygiene products. So I do also relate that it's not easy to know like where you're going to put it, no, if it is inside. But we already have a whole structure in place for PIM to actually send product information around. And it keeps that, we have to keep on piling up stuff. And we need yet another solution. And I honestly wouldn't trivialize that, just put QR code stickers. That is not, that felt too trivial. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, because we have to figure out like what we already have in place, which is already part of regulations on how we actually syndicate and federate information outside our company. So if you can elaborate on that.
So the interesting conversations we're having with customers, and the mature solution that we've got is very much a downstream traceability from the finished manufacturing goods. That's kind of the easy bit, right? The difficult bit, and this is why the acquisition of this product into OpenText is quite interesting, because we're managing, as per Ville's diagram, a lot of that upstream data. So where is the data about the attributes of the product? Where does that raw material data come and sit within your upstream system? Is it sat in your ERP system, your PIM system? And that's the challenge that people are facing about how to organise that data. We see it as an enterprise information management play to say you've got your content data, your video, digital assets, but also that upstream traceability data. That's what people are focused on trying to solve now. But you've got to get that data organised so that when your products are in production, when the labels are printed per batch, that on the production line, that data is sat. Today's batch is going to be based, these are the SKUs we're using, this is where the raw material come from, and you pull all that data together. So it's a challenge. That's why we've brought this product into OpenText, because it requires those pieces of the jigsaw put together. Not everyone's got the information all in one place, right? But our platform, when it does the aggregation online, it pulls data from typically line management software as it going through, so that the attributes get added per batch. So it's a problem. I haven't got the answer, but it's the question. It's a challenge. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I think we're good with the questions, and I think timing as well. So thank you for joining. Glad that some of the additional folks came in as well. So yeah, hope you find this interesting. And again, if you're interested in the Yeti cups, we'll check your details and ship them over. Yeah.
Thank you.